Now on the APEC VIP hotline, cutting-edge training for the serious athlete, apecgo.com. Joining us from rattleandhumsports.com, Kevin Lonnquist covering the Big 12. How you doing, Kevin?
I'm good, Ryan. How are you doing today?
Doing well, thank you very much. Another big weekend of college football. But before we get to this weekend's games, I want to get your take on a couple of things. First of all, Texas blasts Ole Miss. They're 3-0 now, but what do we really know about the Texas Longhorns as of right now?
Well, Bryan, I think the first thing that stands out to you is how efficient the offense was. It was a big coming-out party for David Ash. Throws for career-high 326 yards, 4 touchdowns. They made big plays in the passing game. The vertical game was very, very good. Now, Ole Miss is not very good, as we learned throughout that ball game. Hugh Freeze has got a long way to go with that team. I think I made the comment on your show last week that it's really going to be a decision or a situation for Texas as to are they going to handle this test, the fact they're going on the road because it's a fairly young football team. Can they handle life on the road at night at an SEC environment? And they handled it very, very well. But the problem with Texas, though, is going to be still with making sure that the defense is tightened up. There are still some problems with that group, and Matt Brown even talked about it earlier this week, is the fact that they're still missing some tackles. Their secondary, mainly his safeties, are taking poor angles on some plays unless they're giving up the big plays. I mean, look, they got several turnovers. They blocked a punt last week. So they were good in those areas. Obviously, they got their scoring started last week with the pick 6, but there's still some things that they've got to get tightened up. And when they go to Oklahoma State next weekend, they're going to have some things that they're going to have to work on during this off week to make sure that their defense is still technically sound, that angles are better, so that they're going to cut off the big plays, because they're still susceptible to that right now.
Yeah, and the amazing thing too is looking at that schedule, they are on the verge now when they hit this run of Oklahoma State, West Virginia, Oklahoma, I believe in that order. This could go from being a great season to a disaster or vice versa in the matter of 3 weeks.
Yeah, it's the gauntlet, isn't it?
It really is.
It's one of those things too where, but at the same time, when you're in good conferences like the Big 12 is, you're going to get a good team just about every week. Just to divert for a second, I'm looking at TCU's latter half of their schedule,
yes,
and their last 5 games are against ranked teams. Oklahoma State, at West Virginia, home to Kansas State, at Texas, home to Oklahoma.
Wow.
So, that just shows you that, and again, the rankings will always fluctuate on a week-to-week basis, but it just shows you how it's never going to be easy every week. And so I'm sure if you're a Texas fan, couldn't we have slid maybe Kansas or Iowa State between Oklahoma State and OU or whatever? No, that's just the way the schedule works, so you got to go out and play them. I think Texas is going to have to really rise up, and their defensive play is going to have to pick it up. I'm still seeing some things with them, as I mentioned a moment ago, that they've got to get better on. I think it's a better team, at least in playing Ole Miss. You got a better sense as to who they are. Their athleticism is much, much better than what we saw in the last 2 years. And Ash moves around in the pocket pretty well. Marquise Goodwin, if they can get him more touches, he could be a real difference maker in that offense.
All right, and now let's talk about TCU. A lot of people hammering on the Frogs this week because they came out flat in their very first Big 12 game against Kansas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, several turnovers inside the KU red zone. But, let's give Kansas a little bit of credit here, too. Keep in mind that this was, their first game in the Big 12 this year with a new coaching staff, and the kids were going to be up for that ball game. I think I mentioned that they were probably going to give it their best shot and give TCU all they could handle. The Horned Frogs were very careless with the football, which is not very typical of a Gary Patterson coach team. And I don't know if we should read too much. And the bottom line is that I always kind of look at wins on the road, regardless of what kind of style points are attached to them, as inconsequential. If you win on the road in conference play, then it doesn't matter if it's going to be in Lawrence against KU or if it's going to be in Austin against Texas. When you win on the road in conference play, it's always a good win. Sure, there's going to be a lot of things that the Frogs have got to work on, that they've got to take care of, plus the fact now they've got to take care of their running back situation with Clayman James being out for the year with a torn ACL. But I think they'll be okay. They're going to get Virginia this week, and they should probably take care of the Cavaliers, and then they'll hit the meat of the Big 12 schedule, or I should say in a couple weeks after they get done playing SMU next week. But I think that people can be a little bit irked by it, but let's keep in mind, too, that they still won the football game, and that's all that matters. And they're 1-0 in conference play, and that's the most important thing that Gary's going to be selling to his kids all week.
And probably from Gary's standpoint, he's probably glad to have that video to beat over their heads for the rest of this week too.
Yeah, one thing that Gary though mentioned on the coaches call on Monday was that because the fact that they don't turn the ball over or have games where they have multiple turnovers, is that he doesn't really harp on it. So he said, I'm not going to really beat my kids up over something like this because that's kind of atypical for us. That's probably the right approach. I mean, he knows his team better than anything else. If there was a track record of struggles in that department, then I could see him doing it. How much now is that coach speak for media consumption? Maybe to an extent, but obviously Gary knows the temperature of his team, and they got a W out of it.
Okay. Tonight we've got Baylor at UL Monroe. Before the season started, you look at that and go, yep, that's a win. And now after the last couple of weeks with UL Monroe shocking Arkansas and then probably should have beaten Auburn last week, the Bears are going into a trap.
No, absolutely. I think that Art Briles and his staff have probably poured over those films when they were playing Arkansas and then when they were at Auburn last week in the Warhawks and said, we better get our kids ready. They probably sold that to their kids and saying, look, they may be a Sun Belt Conference team, but you better not ease up on it. Here are a lot of conspiring factors that the Bears are going to have to overcome. Number one, it's Friday night. Number two, it's the only game that's going to be televised on ESPN. In three, it's ULM's home opener. They've been on the road the first 2 weeks of the season. Malone Stadium's a very intimate environment. That stadium's about 20,000 seats from what I recall.
Mm-hmm.
So, and if they pack that place, and they've been promoting the heck out of that game this week, and the fact that those kids stood toe-to-toe with two quality SEC opponents, we may not be saying that about Arkansas right now, but I digress. But anyway, the fact that they have a chance now to go to 2-1 and beat another BCS team, I think what's going to be important for Baylor in this game is that it has to survive the first quarter. If the Bears, if they're one score plus or minus in that game, or even if they're down 10 points, if they keep the game manageable through the first quarter, then I think they'll be fine. Because after that, that's when the game really settles in, the energy is off, and then you've got to play a football game. So if the Bears can get through the first quarter, I think they'll be okay, and they should take care of business. One thing they've got to do is that they've got to do a better job defensively. They're last in the Big 12 in total yards a game at 459 yards, and that was against two subpar opponents, if you will. A good Sam Houston team last week, but they're an FCS team, and then home to SMU, and SMU's not turning out to be a very good team at all. So, I mean, it's going to be a big test for Phil Bennett's defense to really get that ship going.
Okay, and then you have Virginia at TCU tomorrow. Do you see any danger there for TCU at all?
I think it's going to be kind of strength against, or I should say, I think it should be one of those things where TCU should probably win this game, something like 38-17. The one thing that the Cavaliers don't do very well is run the football. They're averaging about 3 yards a game. The Horned Frogs' defensive line has been very stingy this year, and TCU's only allowed 6 points in its first 2 games against Grambling and Kansas. I think the Horned Frogs will take care of business. It's at home, and they're just a better football team. I don't see where the Horned Frogs will be in a fog for this game at all.
And we got to mention, too, that the backup to Wayman James, who steps into the starting lineup now, is Chapel Hill's Matthew Tucker. And so we've seen this kid play in high school. We know he's a quality back, so there may not be a lot of fall-off.
No, I don't think so. I mean, the only thing that's going to be tested about TCU is the depth that's going to be behind Tucker, because the way Gary runs his running backs, last year he was going, Ed Wesley, Wayman James, and Matthew Tucker. Now he's down to Tucker with Wesley leaving the program over the spring, and then James going down with the ACL. And so what you're going to have is you're going to have a senior who's been infrequently used in on-break game, but more importantly, the true freshman B.J. Catalon out of Houston be more a part of that running game, which is fine because I think the Frogs' depth there is pretty good. It's untested. Gary has said that he doesn't think that the depth at this position is as deep as others, but I think there are quality kids there. And I think what you'll see is if there's any problems that TCU has in the running game, you won't see it this Saturday against Virginia. You might start to see any of the concerns pop up during October.
Okay, the real headliner tomorrow, Kansas State against Oklahoma in Norman.
Great matchup. It's a great reunion, of course, between Bill Snyder and Bob Stoops. Stoops was coaching under Snyder in the 1990s as a defensive backs coach, and then as his defensive coordinator before Bob went to Florida. Obviously, Bob's owned it because OU's the better program. I think this game really comes down to the trenches. The Wildcats have had some problems with their pass rush. I mean, North Texas last week, they were 25 out of 28 in passing attempts, and that's pretty bizarre that you would allow a team like that to have that kind of completion percentage. And and Bill Snyder has talked about the fact that that line has got to pick it up because he's going to be facing a better offensive line in OU. However, the Sooners have got their problems because they lost 2 offensive linemen in fall workouts to season-ending injuries. Kyle Evans, one of their guards, is out for the year with an ACL injury. Ben Haber, their center, had to retire because of back issues, and so Oklahoma's depth is going to be challenged in that regard. And again, with OU and Kansas State, you may see a glimpse of that, but really how these two teams hold up in those trenches is going to be known in October. But I still think OU's the better team here. I would like to see how much Justin Brown, the transfer from Penn State, becomes a part of this offense. He's a big target. He can really give Landry Jones something to shoot for. I mean, Kenny Stills is a great receiver, no question. But I think that if Brown becomes a part of this offense, maybe tomorrow against Kansas State is where it starts.
Okay, we'll keep an eye on that. And I know you want to mention West Virginia. They're number 1 in your power rankings in the Big 12 right now. They play a Maryland team that was absolutely awful last year, and the only thing worse than the style of play are the uniforms. So they take on West Virginia. I mean, those uniforms are awful. They're just hideous. But anyway.
They're character-building uniforms, though.
Yeah, if you can take the abuse from wearing them, I guess you can stand anything. So.
Yeah, exactly. It's a great rivalry between them and Maryland, and I think a lot of people in the Big 12 who are not as familiar with West Virginia, understandably so. But if they get a chance to watch this game, it'll be it'll be on FX tomorrow morning. It's a great border rival because these two are going to see each other on the recruiting trail quite a bit. 49th meeting all time. It's very tight. West Virginia leads at 25-21. There are a couple of ties that last year, in spite of Maryland's bad season, rivalry games just bring out the best in everybody, as you well know, Bryan. And the Terps lost the game 37-31, but they really did a good job defensively controlling West Virginia's running game. And we're also going to see a lot more out of Geno Smith. I think Geno is probably one of the top 3 contenders for the Heisman Trophy, the West Virginia quarterback. Think about this. He's already completed 66 out of his first 75 attempts this year. That's 82%.
Wow.
I believe it is. I mean, that's crazy. And I realize it was only against Marshall and James Madison, but I don't care if you're doing that in Sandlot football. If you're doing that, if you have that kind of completion percentage, you're really, really good. And the best thing about Geno is the fact that he is a dual threat, but one thing that Dana Holgorsen has talked about is how much better he's become a pocket passer. So if you want to watch that game tomorrow, watch it for the opportunity of seeing Geno against a BCS opponent and see how he handles it. Plus the fact that it'll be a good rivalry because this is a border war.
Absolutely. It's got a lot of intriguing games tomorrow. Kevin, thanks very much for coming on with us. We appreciate it. Again, check out the website, rattleandhum.com, and you do the power rankings. You do an update on the coaches during the week. Am I leaving anything out?
I think that covers it, but I always appreciate the free publicity.
Hey, listen, we're glad to give it to you, and thank you very much for coming on. Great stuff, and we hope to talk to you next week, okay?
All right, you have a great weekend. Thanks for the visit.
Thank you very much. Kevin Lonnquist, again, from Rattle and Hum Sports, covering the Big 12 on Bryan Houston Sports Radio Live on 99.3 Talk FM.